In a few minutes, we're going to ask you to contemplate, actually, after seeing a pretty strong video clip about the state of affairs on the planet, we're going to ask you to consider what have been some of the arenas of your life where you've been raised into a family and a construct of beliefs. And whether good or bad, this is not any judgment. It's simply human. And so by automatic, where is it that you were moved into a particular way of living, a particular job, a particular mate, and then where might either frustration, since we know that change occurs through either frustration of some kind, things aren't quite right, or into a set of aspirations. You know, I know it can be better than this. And we're going to ask you, where are you now in that journey? And what's been working for you? And what's the aspiration or the frustration that's driving you now? And so as a personal example, just to speak about the fact that I was raised in California, and I know I look like that. I hear that even here on the East Coast in America, but especially when I'm in India. I was raised with lots of nature around me. I was a state champion swimmer. I'm sorry to say, I really had no idea how much the rest of the world may have been suffering at the time when I was in my greatest, earliest growth time. And I was raised in a family where essentially, speaking of God, spirituality, speaking of anything like that was really a sign of weakness. It was not accepted. I was in a very industrial family in the 1970s, and it was just a time when we were in a great boom time, and my father ended up becoming CEO of a major corporation, kind of backbone of America, and this was the experience of that for me, was that there was not a lot of variation in terms of where my career was going to head. Now, having been raised around nature, that became our cathedral. It became our shared experience as a family. And it wasn't until, so we had a great early experience, and then we moved to the Midwest, mostly asphalt. We weren't able to swim. It was just really a whole different experience and culture. And at that time, literally, my family culture began to tank. We began to dissolve as a family, our glue, and we eventually found ourselves, but honestly, it was through experiences of like going to camp or working on a farm and engaging ourselves in manual labor and things like that once again. And what I realized after my taking on a career as a global consultant to many different corporations, and then professor of organization development, and moving in and out of various careers, at this time it's an experience of moving full circle and asking the question out of both frustration and aspiration, what is important? And what's important is leaving a beautiful world for the next generation. I've been gifted by all that I've received. It's time. And so I enrolled myself in another PhD program, the regenerative sciences. How do we regenerate this earth? Working with the Yale University Sustainable Food Project, engaging in larger kinds of projects. What about our environment? And what about business and government and the positive role in society that they can play by pulling together and cross-boundary and looking at the value chains and values-based chain of how we provide our products and services to one another. So this is my great deep dive at this time. And it's come both out of being automatic, also some frustration, some loss of sense of self somewhere along that line, and recognizing when are the times I felt most alive, and let me be about that. So that's one personal example. Have you got one also, Michael?
I grew up in New York City in a very diverse area, there were people from many cultures. My grandparents were immigrants from Italy. And in some ways, in the 50s in Brooklyn, there were still a lot of connections to the old world. Just one example is that we always were able to go and pick out our chickens when they were alive before we ate them. It's a bit like India is today. There were alive chickens and chicken coops and chicken houses in many places. And so I probably was 13 or 14 before I didn't see the chicken I was eating alive before I was able to eat it. And the eggs were fresh. So I think that we've seen the world change a great deal. I was quite lucky to go to the finest schools and to graduate from some of those schools with honors, and to be able to work in large law firms, in small businesses, in energy and computers, in consulting and professional services, to work on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. for a period of time, and to work in a large bank. And through all of those experiences, it always was clear to me that somehow, so often when we would come together in groups, bright, intelligent, motivated people with IQs of 120 or 30 or 40 would come together, and so frequently the collective IQ of the group would be 68. And I could see that when people were in a crisis, when people really needed to work together, they would transcend their individual interests, they would have a sense of participation, and they would want more of that, and yet they found it so difficult to create that in their everyday environment. And it struck me that there is something askew in the contemporary American and Western social orientation that finds meaning in consumption, or attempts to find meaning in consumption, and where the ethos seems to be to get as much as you can for yourself in the short view. Not that that's conscious among most people. People espouse different values and truly hold a deeper commitment to a wider community. But I could see how, over the course of my life in the last 50 years, the bonds that held those local communities together have shifted. And the satisfaction that people receive, even though they have such a larger number of material goods, has declined. And so, after 9/11, I found myself founding a school in New York City based on all the world's wisdom traditions in the light of contemporary knowledge in psychology, cognitive science, and cultural studies, in order to help us better understand how we really are a part of and can participate in a global society, because it became to me increasingly clear that if my children and my grandchildren, if our children and our grandchildren are to have a hospitable place to live on planet Earth 40 or 50 or 60 or 100 years from now, then we needed to overcome that dumb-down effect. We needed to get smarter in the ways we work together. And we needed to find new ways to make meaning that were truly more satisfying and in harmony with the earth on which we all live.
Thank you. So here's the deal. This is global in scope, what we're speaking of course. Yes, we have a crisis of leadership because we're not sure. We don't quite have the structures to make these global level decisions. And at times, many of us, I don't know about you, but I am just trying to get through the day. So, there's a great teacher. Her name is Carolyn Mace. She speaks about this being the first time in history when we have been experiencing a spiritual crisis and having to figure out how to pay taxes at the same time. Not an easy time at all. What we're going to do is set you up to watch this video now, and it's from an organization called Awakening the Dreamer. What you'll find is that there's a plea that's come from a tribe in South America that is inviting us to come up with a new dream. The idea being that we've all been with a certain series of thoughts and what they would even call a trance of consumerism. We have led the way here in the Western world. We see many possibilities for the role of India in the future of this planet. Please take a look at this video and find what you will. And afterwards, Father Thomas will guide you in a conversation about your own role, where you are at this time, what's been automatic for you in your life, what has moved you either out of frustration or aspiration, and what's important now. And we will ask again, how big is your family? So please watch.